If you're an aspiring MMA fighter looking to make your amateur debut fight, then you clicked on the right video. In today's video, I'm going to share with you my experiences in amateur MMA and give you some tips and tricks that will help you succeed and keep you out of trouble in your amateur MMA run. So with that said, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Combat Corporation, your source of combat sports. I'm your host, Al the Postmaster Tomorrow, and today I'm going to give you a rundown on amateur MMA. During this video, I'm basically going to give you a ton of different ground rules when it comes to amateur MMA. That way you're a little bit more armed with knowledge when it comes to getting into the sport. Whether you want to compete because you love the sport, whether you want to prove it to yourself, or whether you want to take it to the next step and become a pro, I think I have some solid advice that will really help benefit you. Now, I know what you might be thinking if you're new to the channel. Well, doesn't he just review boxing gloves? Well, yes, I do review gear, but I also have extensive amateur competition across a lot of other combat sports. I started boxing at 12 and I have over 70 amateur boxing matches. I've competed in over 200 wrestling matches across high school and college. I've had kickboxing and Muay Thai fights. I've competed in a lot of amateur grappling tournaments. And on top of it, I have 13 amateur MMA fights. So with that said, I do think I have enough knowledge to try and help you as much as I can and give you some of my experiences. That way I can tell you what got me in trouble and what will keep you out of trouble. And before I go into this video, I wanted to say thank you to Tmorales 24, who actually commented on an Instagram story of mine and asked me this question, and that was career choices for fighters as amateurs and pros pursuing the dream. And I wanted to split that video into two parts, one for amateur and one for pro, primarily because I'm only 1-0 as a pro currently, and I don't really have a lot of experiences in professional MMA so far, but I have a lot in amateur MMA, and it is two completely different worlds. So I wanted to make this video to help you guys out, because I get this question all the time. How do I get into MMA? Even people at work ask me, hey, how do you necessarily get into that? So I'm going to give you all my answers and give you the best solid piece of advice that I wish I got. All right, guys, my first tip that I try and tell everybody, especially if they're coming from other amateur competition, it is understand that amateur MMA is a completely different animal from other amateur combat sports. Now, to sum it up in a sentence, basically amateur MMA is very much tried to be run like professional MMA. They try and run it in the same ways as far as matchmaking, promotion, name it. They try and run it just like a professional MMA show. A good example for you, if you ever can, go online and type in Cage Wars MMA, and I might be biased because I fought for them a lot as an amateur, but they have matches and events planned about 2 or 3 months apart from each other, and they literally post the fights as they come out for each card, just like the UFC would. Amateur MMA and their matchmaking is very much set up like the professionals. A promoter will reach out to you, or a matchmaker, if you want to call it that, at amateurs, will reach out to you and say, hey, we have an event in February. We'd like for you to fight for us. Will you fight this guy? He's 0-0, or he's 1-0, or he's 2-0 with this record, blah, blah, blah. We want you to fight for us on this date. Unlike amateur boxing and wrestling, where you get your amateur boxing book or your USA Wrestling card, you register for a tournament, or you show up, you weigh in, and you hope someone's in your weight class to compete against. So you might get booked for your first fight 2 months ahead of time and know who you're fighting that whole time, which is a mental tax if you've been around long enough. And you will understand that you have more time to prepare for that person. You're going to understand that person. You're going to do research on this person. Unlike amateur boxing, wrestling, and other things like that, where you just show up, weigh in, you don't know who you're shaking hands with until that bracket comes out. It's the same thing with, say, jiu-jitsu tournaments for like Grappling Industries or Naga. You don't really know who it is you're going against until like the week of the tournament, or a couple days, or the day of the tournament. You might have some late signers. So that's really how amateur MMA works. They will matchmake months ahead of time. Also, amateur MMA promotions, usually depending on the state, like in New York State, will have an independent sanctioning body, just like a lot of other people will as well. So in this case, I've competed for GAMA, I've competed for USMTA, and I've competed for ISKA as far as amateur sanctioning bodies, which are all sanctioned through the New York State Athletic Commission. But they have big names that have run big cards. Like I've had Dan Murgliata and Kevin Mulhall referee my bouts before. So it's not like having a USA Boxing official wearing their white shirt going in the ring and do whatever it is they want. Sure, they took the course through USA Boxing, but that's USA Boxing's job. It's not per athletic commission. Another thing about amateur MMA as far as professionally run goes is they expect for you to be as professional as possible. They want you to show up on weight, or else they will blacklist you if you miss weight. They want you to be prompt with your medicals, because if you miss your medicals, they will blacklist you. I've seen these things happen. They don't like that stuff. And then on top of it, if you pull out of a bout, like a week before simply because you aren't ready, or if you flat out say, I'm not in the mood to do it, or I don't want to do it, or if you double book yourself for that same weekend and you forgot, you will get blacklisted by those local promoters. So very much, please treat this like a professionally run show in a lot of places. You're going to find that a lot of local MMA guys are trying to fill up their card a lot so they can keep products going. Don't get me wrong, they're trying to make their money, but they need you to be on those cards, and they rely on you to be as courteous and professional as they're trying to be to you. So with that said, just like with every other thing out there, there are some good guys and bad guys out there, but there's a tip for that later on down the line. So let's move on to tip number 2. All right, tip number 2 for me is to just understand, for now, it is not a career quite yet. Not saying that it won't ever be, but it's not a career quite yet. Now, if you're asking me, well, Al, what do you mean by a career? I mean something that is going to financially support you for as long as you do it, like a full-time job. And I can tell you right now that even though I'm 1-0 as a pro and I've made money doing this between coaching, private lessons, and my first professionalist paycheck, it is not nearly enough for me to make a full-time living off of. Therefore, it's not really a career yet. It's just a very time-consuming passion that I hope turns into a career one day. And for me, that's how I think you should treat amateur MMA. It's a labor of love. You love to do this, right? You're not going to make enough money to really sustain you for a long time. I've met so many amateurs that say, this is my life, I'm full-time with it, and then they work at a full-time job outside of it. Just like a lot of my teammates work full-time jobs outside of what they're doing. And there's some really good amateurs out of our gym. I have a couple pro teammates. I used to have a guy that would work at a steel mill every day for 12 hours, then come train for 4. That's what I mean. And do you think he made money in those 4 hours of training? No. And on top of it all, even when you get the pro and your first couple pro fights, I can tell you right now, my first pro fight, I didn't make as much as my full-time paycheck pays me, and I don't make a lot of money, guys. So for me, a career is when you get to like that level in the UFC, Bellator, whatever it is, until you start making consistent cash flow off of this to where you can get your own benefits, you can get your own insurance, whatever it might be, right, through those companies, through those organizations that are going to pay you all the time, enough for you to survive for years on end. So for me, guys, amateur MMA is this exactly. It is the proving ground for yourself, and it is also where you're going to make the mistakes and get the experience that you need to get now before you go to pro and it is too late. All right, tip number 3 might seem very self-explanatory, and that is make sure you find a nice solid gym that you can call home. I would really advise against you being independent. Now, being an independent on a circuit means that you don't train with anyone specifically. You might train yourself, you might train with some friends that know what they're doing, or not know what they're doing, that happens a lot too, or you might train at a ton of different gyms in the area. You might go to this local jiu-jitsu school, then go to this kickboxing gym, then you go to this MMA gym, now I'm going to this boxing club. You train all over the place, but nothing is solid home. You have a different person in your corner every fight, and you're trying to make it work by yourself. I've taken the independent route when I was in college because I was just fighting for the fun of it, and I can tell you right now, when you run into someone that has structure, that has a discipline of a team around them, there's nothing like that. For me, you always want to try and get a solid gym around you. Now, if you're at that solid gym, even if you're not, you should follow this rule, and I would say you should want to train about 4 or 5 days a week, at least an hour or 2 hour sessions, and you want to learn as much as you can, whether it be taking that jiu-jitsu class, taking that kickboxing class, taking whatever it might be. Our gyms run a little different in that we are strictly MMA. Everything we do is with MMA gloves on. We were doing everything that works for the sport of MMA. I would really try and take everything that you learn from all those things and apply it to that sport. But for me, be in the gym 4 or 5 days a week. I'm not saying that you have to wake up at 5 and run your 6 miles. I'm not saying that you have to go work out in the morning at 5 a.m. I'm just saying make sure you're learning what you're going to be doing at least 4 or 5 days a week. That's my bare minimum for that, and that's usually our bare minimum at our gym. When it's a pro, I say you should be doing it basically every day as much as you can. All right, so after you're established with your gym and you're training 4 or 5 days a week, that's when you have to sit down, ask you and your coach, am I ready? So I'm going to say there's 2 parts of this. If you ask yourself if you're ready and your answer is immediately, yes, I want to do this, I'm ready, and your coach's answer is yes, immediately, I think you're ready, that's when you are ready to go, you're ready to get into that cage and do your best. However, if your coach says, I don't think you're quite ready yet and we really need to work on these assets, take that as constructive criticism and work on it even harder than you did before. And you might be shocked within a week or 2, your coach might say, hey, maybe I made the wrong call, we need to get in there. Or he might tell you that, oh, hey, we still need to work on a couple more things before I'm comfortable putting you in that cage. Because at the end of the day, you are representing that gym and it is your health and safety on the line. However, on the other hand, if you ask yourself if you're ready and you have the slightest bit of doubt in your brain, I beg you, do not sign up to do that fight, because I've been there. You're going to think, oh, but I'll be ready by this point and by that time. If you're not ready right now, you won't be ready by that time as well. I don't mean that about like losing weight or getting in shape. I mean that mental edge you have to have when you get in there of just accepting that you are ready to throw down and get in a cage and basically fist fight with somebody. You get slammed by someone, to choke someone out, to get your arm cranked off. All these different things could happen in that cage. And if you are not ready mentally to do so, I would strongly advise that you wait till you are. Keep staying in the gyms, keep staying consistent before you think you want to go in there and do it. That's my biggest piece of advice as far as that goes. Make sure you are ready yourself and follow what your coach says. If your coach says no, take that with constructive criticism, with an open mind, work on it, and then eventually you will fight. It is an inevitability. So long as you want it one day and so long as you put the work in, you will get it. Now that last piece of advice kind of ties into this next one, and that is, do not set up a fight without your team having some type of knowledge of it. Don't go behind their back. If your coach tells you you're not ready to fight and you disagree, don't take that as they're trying to down you or criticize you. Take that as they're genuinely looking out for you. Don't reach out to the local MMA show and say, hey, my coach said this, but you know, whatever, I want to fight on this. He'll be cool with it. I can tell you right now, I have seen so many relationships ruined that way. Even in my own gym, I've had multiple teammates just sign stuff up, and then my coach is like, what are you doing, dude? I told you that it's not a good idea for this, and you completely just disrespected my opinion of someone who's been in the sport for 20, 30 years. Why would you just go out of your way and do that? It never looks good when you do that. If someone tells you that I want you on their show, I advise you, if you have a manager, divert them to your manager, divert them to your team, divert them to your coach. Do not answer that unless you are purely independent. And like I said, revert to the last tip. I wouldn't be so independent, just because you really need that structure of a team, because they're looking out for you. As much as there are really good promoters out there that have the best interest, I tell you right now, even the promoters I know and love have one thing in mind, and that is they need you on their card so people will buy tickets, sell them out, and make them money at the end of the day. That's what it is to them. So they're not necessarily looking out for your best interest at all times. Trust me when I tell you that. Even if an amateur promoter offers to pay you, which I've heard of, it is illegal. You can't do that. Amateurisms don't get paid, but that's the idea behind it. Just don't set up fights without your team knowing. There's probably a good reason why your team is not setting up that fight for you. Follow what your team says. Don't go behind their back. Make sure everyone is on the same page. Trust me, it will make everything in your amateur and eventual pro run much better. Next tip might not be something you stop to think about, but believe it or not, you will have some media opportunities that I think you should take advantage of. Even at a young amateur level, you will have people asking you to be on their local podcast, radio show. You might get newspaper interviews, local TV show interviews, whatever it might be, right? Like when I got to fight for Mike Tyson, which was one of the craziest moments of my life, I had a couple people reach out for podcasts that were bigger than just my local ones. I had a local TV interview and stuff like that, because a local guy from our local area was going to fight in front of Mike Tyson. That was a big deal. So if you're fighting your first amateur MMA promotion, maybe your old college wrestling coach or your old high school coach from wrestling wants to come and watch you compete. Maybe your old teacher, your grandmother, your father, whoever it might be, want to come watch you compete. Share it across social media, and it also prepares you. Say if you get a hater comment one of these days, if you get Johnny down the street bothering you, you will now learn that that shouldn't bother you, because if you ever get to a high level in the UFC, tons of people are going to constantly try and chop you down because of the success you have. People are going to call you overrated. People are going to say that you suck. People are going to say the gym you trained with suck. Guess what? So long as you're winning, doesn't really matter what they're saying. So this really teaches you all those things at a very young stage. So with that said, put yourself on a local podcast, make some time for that. Reach out to different newspapers, see if they'll do a story on you. Reach out to local news people, see if they'll do a story on you. There's always young interviewers and there's always young people in the media field that are looking for something a little bit different. And if you say, hey, I'm going to lock myself in a cage and fight somebody, they might take interest in that. So please, even at this stage, put yourself out there and try and get on some type of media show. I think you would actually be surprised how much it will promote your fight and see how much people will actually show up that you didn't think would. All right, so we talked about the build up to your fight as far as social media goes, as far as training goes, how often you should be in the gym. Let's talk about the night of the fight. Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, there is a massive skill gap. or you lost, right? Losses will happen when it comes to amateur MMA. And like I said, this is the time to correct those mistakes from your loss. Now, what I mean by the skill gap thing, right, is that you might have guys that get into amateur MMA. I've literally seen this happen in front of me, that have been doing jiu-jitsu for 6 months with some striking classes on top of it, and they know how to shoot a decent double leg, and they get locked in the cage with a Division I national champion wrestler. I've actually seen that happen directly in front of me before, and it's never fair and it's not fun, but at the same time, you got to understand there are people that have a lot more experience in that type of gap. But I wouldn't say no to those fights, primarily because it's just amateurs. There's really no big detriment if you lose or win in that case, because like I said, people really only care about your professional record. Your amateur MMA record actually gets wiped out when you go pro. No one says, oh man, he was 10-0 as an amateur, we'll put him as 10-0 as a pro. No, it doesn't work that way. You start out as a pro 0-0. So you are going to fight those guys that are just really good at an amateur level, that have been training much longer than you. Like I said, that Division I national champion wrestler that's been wrestling since he was 4 years old, compared to you, a 25-year-old that just started jiu-jitsu 6 months ago, and you just wanted to try it for fun. You got taken down, you got your back taken, you got choked out in under a minute. Happens. Dust yourself off, move on, and then you might try it again, or maybe you won't. But understand that losses and skill gaps will happen. This is the point in time where you can learn from that much easier than you could if you got the pros and it was too late. Now, to piggyback off that, another thing you've got to understand too is that I think you should compete frequently as far as amateur goes. For me, when I boxed, I was competing virtually every weekend. In wrestling, I competed a couple times during the week, once during the weekend. And for me in amateur MMA, because of the structure of it, of those events coming out like weeks at a time or months at a time, like 2 months at a time, I competed every 2 months. Like when I competed in my last year as an amateur, I fought September, November, February. Then it was March. Then I think I skipped to July, September again. So 6 bouts, really about 2 months in between each fight. So that's the idea that you have going on. Then I fought in January as a pro. So that's 7 fights in about 1.5 years time. So that's what I recommend to you, especially in amateurs, so you can get different looks. Like my first fight was against a very good striker. I used my wrestling that fight. My second fight, I lost against a very tough wrestler. Then I outstruck a very good striker. And then I outpointed a very good grappler, jiu-jitsu guy, so I negated his jiu-jitsu, stuff like that. So I competed against tons of different styles within that year, so I can learn different things, correct my mistakes in those cases, see what I did right in those things, basically take what was useful, discard what was not, in the words of Bruce Lee, and that's the idea, right? So for me, compete as often as you can. Don't say no to a whole lot of people. People are going to accuse you of ducking them all the time, but just understand, if you're comfortable fighting for a certain promotion or people that you know, or your coach says, oh, we only fight for these guys because they know what they're doing, don't get upset at some guy in some other place saying, oh, you're ducking them, oh, you're scared of them. It's amateur MMA. A loss on that record means virtually nothing. Treat it that way. Yes, it sucks to lose, but just remember, you're going to learn a lot more from those losses than you will from just blowing out the competition against guys that really shouldn't be in there with you. So with that said, my advice to you, fight and fight often. All right, a crucial piece of advice that I give everybody, especially when they get into amateur MMA and they think they're gonna go in there, they're gonna have fight of the year, they're not gonna get stopped until they're on the verge of going out or until they go out. That is not the case in amateur MMA. Just like in amateur boxing or in amateur wrestling, it's very different nowadays, right? If you are in trouble, if you are at risk, if you are hurt, if you are anything, an amateur official will stop that bout that fast to keep you safe. I've had referees tell me to my face, I don't care how you feel about it, I want you to go to school or work on Monday the same way you came in today. And that's exactly what they want you to do. They don't want you to go to work with a cut over your eye. They don't want you to go to work concussed, not understand what you're doing, and then suffer at work or school. They want you to come into that fight the same way you're going to leave that fight, completely okay if they can. And that's the whole point behind amateurs officials. Don't get mad if they stop the fight too early in your mind. I've had that happen to me once, and I was really upset. I was yelling at the referee until he told me, he asked me a serious question, did you get paid for this fight? And I said no. And he said, why do you care? It's an amateur fight. No one cares about your record. And he was right. No one cared. People can say early stoppage all they want. I would like to go back and get that fight one day. Who cares? But at the end of the day, I was able to wrestle a tournament the very next day, a full tournament, and actually win some of my matches with a clear head. I was completely okay. All I had was a little scuff over my eye that went away in a couple days. So your referee, your official, your whoever is really looking out for you and your safety. Understand that safety happens above all when it comes to these sports. It's not going to be like Chet Congo and Pat Barry where Dan Miragliotta lets you go until it's too late. I've seen Dan Miragliotta referee my own fights, and when I thought fights should have kept going, he stopped it immediately, basically saying there's no point in it. You know, it's a non-event. We're going home. And that's the idea. So don't get upset at these officials. They're there for your safety. All right, my last piece of advice as a general rule of thumb is, for one, don't go pro too early, and don't schedule your pro debut while you're still an amateur and you have amateur fights lined up. I have seen that play out for people before, and it was very rarely ever played out well. In fact, one of the only times I've ever seen it really play out well was a guy by the name of, Bo Nickel, who's in the UFC because he is a freak athlete, and he's an exception to all that because he is such a freak athlete, because he is an Olympic caliber wrestler. He has great boxing, he has great skills, right? But you've seen it not play out well for guys like Aaron Pico that didn't have a lot of MMA experience, goes into his first pro MMA fight. He gets smoked by virtually, as most people would call him, a nobody, or no one really knows who he is. That's just kind of what happens when you don't have experience in these sports. It's the same thing as like a local guy, and I hope if he ever watches this, I hope he doesn't get offended when I say this. Very talented, heavy-handed, bigger guy, super good, right? And I always love watching him fight. Like, his personality, he had this nice showmanship about him, very cocky in nature, but also confident in his abilities, as he should have been. He's very good. But his last two amateur fights, he got knocked cold because he just wasn't fighting at the same caliber before on his other fights. He was fighting guys very much lower in skill set than him. So when he had any type of opposition or someone that stayed in the fire when he put him in there, that's kind of what happens. You know, you're going to get stomped out is basically what's going to happen. And he had this whole idea that he was going to win those next two pro fights, then he was going to go, or those next two amateur fights, then he was going to go pro by this certain date, fight on this specific card, and all these other things. And that's basically where it goes wrong for people. Now he has to reassess everything now as an amateur because he treated it like a career, basically, is what I mean. He didn't treat it like that passion. He treated it like a career. He had it all planned out, date by date by date. Telling you right now, this is a very volatile environment. You never know what's going to happen until the next day. You might get injured. You might get your knee blown out. You might get a fight pulled. You might not be able to fight for a long time. I've had fights over the last year since I've last fought. It's almost been a whole year since I fought. I've had people pull out. I've had people say no. I got sick. It's a ton of things that happen when it comes to this. Things that are stopping blocks. So don't just schedule your pro debut ahead of time when you don't know what's going to happen. You might lose your next couple amateur fights. On top of it, don't go pro too early. And what I mean by that is I've had guys that were like 6-0 as an amateur. There was one guy that was 6-0, all first round armbar finishes, and he was really good. As a pro, he is 0-3 with all TKO losses because he didn't know how to fight a really good wrestler that could just get on top of him and beat him up, because he fought all strikers, all guys that just weren't at his level yet. And that's basically what's going to happen. For me, like I said, it revolves around virtually every single thing I've said in every tip. Amateur MMA is the part of your life that are part of your, I guess we could just say, like, MMA journey, right? Where you're going to make your mistakes and learn from experiences now before it's too late when you go pro. Because like I said, people are going to want to sign a 5-20 amateur, but they're not going to want to sign a 5-20 pro. It's just very unlikely for that to happen unless basically they need someone to come in there, take a dive, or get beat up real quick. You don't want to be that guy, trust me, because then at that point, you know, what have you done other than make yourself look like a laughingstock? So guys, like I said, these were just general rules for me of when you're getting into amateur MMA. There's tons of different nuances and different things that I could talk about at length, but I advise for you to put that in the comment section below, and also make sure you email or message me on Instagram, Facebook, any other type of social media, and follow me on those pages as well, and ask me as many questions as you want. What is your specific situation? How can I help you? Did anything I say today help you or give you a good idea? Or maybe I said something that you didn't think about. Maybe I said something or I didn't say something that you think I should have put in this video. And I'd really like for you to let me know, once again, in the comments below, and message me on all my social medias. And always feel free to email me with more in-depth questions. With that said, guys, thank you so much for watching this episode. I hope it helped you. And as always, I'll see you on the next video. Have a great day, everybody.